Well, it's good to see you all here. As has already been said, the topic tonight is identity. So who are we? And what I want to do is show how that relates to where we've come from. So how it relates to what we believe about origins. And I'm going to argue later on, we need to get our view of creation right to properly understand actually what it means to be human, which is a pretty basic thing in life. And that also helps to explain why Christ is the saviour that we need. So this sort of term identity maybe sort of makes you sort of glaze over a little bit. What exactly are we talking about? We don't go around contemplating our identity, and yet we sort of do, and it's something we instinctively recognise. So, for example, if you see this, hopefully you laugh, and although actually it's a bit close to given the current debates on euthanasia, it's actually a bit close to the wire. But it's funny because we recognise that horse identity is different to human identity. Okay, that's how that works, and you do that just instinctively. Now, some years ago, I was at an exhibition in London, this sort of Lego exhibition of superheroes. My son was wanting to go there. And I was really intrigued by all these messages that you had under some of the displays. All this sort of stuff about identity. What kind of hero will you be? Take a look at yourself, a really deep look. Think about who you are. And I'm thinking, whoa, what's going on here? And they say, remember who you wanted to be as a kid. Hang on to those original dreams, because the purest essence of who you are, of who you're meant to be, is there. And so this stuff is around us. And the whole thinking there was about sort of almost seeing yourself as a sort of superhero, an identity almost you can create for yourself. Obviously, it comes up hugely with social media. Often we're trying to project an identity, aren't we? This is the person I want people to think that I am. Or to take other examples, think of the whole sexuality debate. You see, to say something like I'm gay or I'm a homosexual used to be a statement about behaviour, about what you did. Now it's actually a statement of identity. Sexuality used to be a verb about what you did. Now it's about who you are, your identity. Hence, questioning that is no longer just saying, well, we don't like what you're doing. It's saying we don't like who you are. And that's why it creates such a deep reaction. It's about your identity. That's why it's seen as so offensive. Now, one of the reasons identity is so important is that it shapes what we do. There's a very close link between identity and behaviour. And again, this isn't complicated. Young children understand this. Now, I don't know if this is still on, or even if any of you have ever watched this, but this is Ben and Holly's Little Kingdom. And you have this kingdom of fairies and of elves that live alongside each other. The fairies seem to be the ones who are in charge. They use magic, they fly around. The elves are the people that do all the work. They hate magic and they blow little horns. The key thing is, because their identity is different, they do different things. So Ben Elf would say things like, elves are good at making things, and I'm an elf. And then he blows a horn to show that's who he really is. And the basic point is that what you do, what it's right to do, is determined by who you think you are. You're meant to act in line with your identity. Identity is also linked to value. Imagine a fatal car crash. What is going to matter more? The destruction of the car or of the people? What's the difference between the two? Because when you think about it, the car is a complex mobile object made of metal. The people are complex mobile objects made of meat. And according to the evolutionary account of life, that is, in a sense, all they are. They're just meat in motion. It's very hard to see why there is some sort of intrinsic value in them more than, say, the car. Well, the Bible, of course, tells us something very different. It tells us that we are people of infinite value, not because of what we're made from, but because of who made us. So I'm going to introduce you to a sort of biblical view of our identity as human beings, and then compare that to what our society tells us. And I want you to really see how much more attractive the biblical view actually is, which is handy because it's the true one. So, where do we get our identity as human beings? Well, here's a pretty basic place to begin. Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. This is actually what is unique to humanity. There are other creatures that are made on day 6 of creation, also made from the ground. But only mankind is made in the image of God. And it's repeated 3 times in the passage. And people have written sort of great tomes on what it means to be the image of God. But just from the passage itself, I think there's some very straightforward things we can say. For a start, it means we are made by God. In other words, we are creatures. We didn't make ourselves. We don't have life in ourselves. Only God has life in himself. We are dependent. We are limited people. We are made like God. Whatever image means, it must imply some degree of similarity. So we're not the same as God, and yet we reflect God to some degree. For example, in the very next verse, we're told that we're to rule the creation like God does. And we are people who use language. We create, we plan, we reason, we imagine, we love. And it's because we are made like God that we can relate to God, that we are made for God. You see, the animals were made by God, but God doesn't have a conversation with the animals. There isn't that personal relationship there that you find that he has with mankind. He gives commands to mankind. He doesn't do that to the animals in the same way. And so our value comes from our relationship to God, which of course also means we're accountable to God. And it's also really worth noticing that I'm saying we here because the image of God isn't something merely individual. Our identity as human beings isn't merely for us as individuals. In that verse, Genesis 1:27, God is speaking about humankind corporately, who come in 2 forms, male and female. And so God is, if you like, treating humanity as a unity. And it means our identity as human beings is also about our identity with other humans, with other image bearers. We are defined by our relationships. So we can summarize our human identity as a sort of network of relationships. And this sort of diagram is going to keep coming up in different ways. First of all, we have a relationship with the world, by which I mean I'm a physical being. I have a body. My body is part of my identity. That is who I am. I'm part of the universe. I'm made of atoms. And all of that sort of governs what I'm able to do. I can't live underwater. I can't live in a vacuum or a furnace or be in 2 places at once. It means geography matters for my identity. That's why places matter to us. We talk about our identity, about where we're from. You find that in the Bible. It's because we have this relationship with the world. We're also made for a relationship with God. We are physical people, but we are not merely physical people. We are spiritual people. We can pray to an unseen God. But it's not that the sort of spiritual trumps the physical. No, we need both together. It would be a bit like saying that you only need one wing on an aeroplane. It's both the physical and the spiritual go together. And our bodies matter. Our bodies are not this sort of encumbrance we need to escape. And of course, the real proof of the importance of our physicalness is the way the Son of God takes on a real human body and comes to live as a human being in that way. So the physical and the spiritual are brought together in human identity. And the other relationship we have here is our relationship with other people. Our identity is defined by a network of relationships. primarily that's family, isn't it? Much of who I am, what I look like, the character I have or whatever, well, maybe not character totally, but there's various things that come from our parents, don't they? What makes me unique is my particular set of family relationships. No one else has the same father and mother and 2 sisters as me. It's one reason why the Bible is very concerned about genealogy. That's, all those lists of names and things in the Bible. It's not just irrelevant padding. It's actually telling you something very important. And it means that in a biblical understanding, there is no such thing as a totally independent individual. This idea that we're just isolated individuals with sort of no connection to anyone else, no impact on anyone else. People say, well, it's my own decision, it's got nothing to do with anyone else. Well, that's actually not true of anything. Everything we do impacts other people. There is no such thing as me in isolation and autonomous. I only exist connected with a physical universe in relationship with other people and with God. And so this identity that I have is a gift. It is something that is given. It is received, not achieved. And my job as a human being is to live in line with this identity that God has given me. It's something fixed. It's something stable. The alternative, or an alternative, that we find dominant in our Western culture today is what I'm going to call meism, where basically you choose and create your identity. Your identity is something you choose, something you create for yourself. It's achieved, not received. And we'll give some examples of that in a moment. But it's no accident where this has come from. It's come as a direct result of dismantling the understanding of humanity given by God. It really boils down to an attempt to deny the network of those connections I've just been talking about before. But it can only ever be an attempt because we're constrained by reality. So, for example, we will try and deny that relationship to God. We like to think we're self-sufficient. We like to think we can solve our own problems. You never hear a politician saying, well, this is a really big problem. This is a really difficult decision. We need to pray about this. And in fact, when people have spoken like that, they've been seen as unfit to rule. We reject the idea of a spiritual reality. Any spiritual sense is self-created. And yet, people still want to worship in their own way. They are still looking for something beyond themselves. We can't escape this essential character about ourselves. We're also actually a very moralistic people. Don't think that our contemporary culture is sort of not interested in morality. It's very interested in morality. It's a very moralistic society. The difference is, if you like, what the rules are. So, you'll get a very moralistic response to how much carbon dioxide you use, for example. That's a moral issue, as is homophobia or whatever else. So you almost have a sort of the Pharisees today are increasingly actually outside the church, the cultural elite that are telling you all these rules that you're meant to keep. So we're constantly sort of smuggling in a sort of godness, even though we want to deny it. The other thing is we sort of deny our relationship with the world. Now, again, this is all a bit contradictory, because on the one hand, people like to insist that the material is what is real, is sort of everything. We're just atoms. And yet we have this constant pressure to try and escape our physical nature, our physical limitations. I think one of the attraction of video games is that you can sort of be a superhero. You can enter a world where you are you're released from bodily limitations. You can sort of be invincible. Pornography as well is an escape from the messy complexity of interacting with a real person with a real body. And as we're going to see, the whole transgender ideas is about escaping from our bodies. So in these different ways, we want to try and deny the sort of physicality of our identity. And we also try and deny our relationship with others, which again might sound surprising, because aren't we in a society obsessed with relationships? And yet it's only relationships of a certain kind. We're less keen on relationships that are fixed, that require commitment, that involve cost, maybe even membership of a sort of a club or something like marriage. We are happy with relationships insofar as they serve our needs. We see a relationship that is given, that is fixed, as something that's actually constraining to our freedom. So what happens once you've sort of cut all of those connections with your identity? Well, of course, you're left with just me. Your identity is now just you. The problem is it's an undefined you. It's no longer an identity that is fixed. Now, this gives a certain sort of freedom, but it's the freedom of a free-floating cloud, which actually isn't as free, or it's not the sort of freedom you actually really want. It's an identity that, just as a cloud can keep changing shape, your identity can keep changing. It can be what you choose to be. But in doing this, you have the problem that you have created a me that is no longer important. This me has no intrinsic objective value. You're just atoms, and not even particularly expensive atoms. You're mostly carbon, not platinum. You're back to this sort of meat in motion. So if I'm going to have value, I'm going to have to create my own worth, my own significance. How am I going to do that? Well, it's going to be in competition with all the other people also trying to create their own significance. You're going to have to create your own worth. And so as we're all trying to do that, well, one example is the world of social media, isn't it? My worth is my likes, or how popular, how famous I am. People's desire to be a celebrity. Or my worth is my beauty, how attractive I can be to others. Or my worth is my success, my achievements, be that in exams or sport or business. Or it can even be something that might seem rather more sort of altruistic. Sometimes people say, I want to be someone who makes a difference. You know, and that can be for a good cause. But it's interesting, isn't it, that you need to have this sort of thing to almost create a justification for existing. It can be through being a victim. If you've suffered, if you've been oppressed or marginalised or faced injustice, you can be someone who is admired and noticed and affirmed. In a funny sort of way, it can give you worth in today's culture. Being a victim can actually be a route to being empowered. But the problem with all of these things is what happens if you lose them? What happens if you lose your victim status, or if you don't achieve, or you lose your popularity, or you lose your good looks? It's not just a setback, it's not just a disappointment. You've lost your very identity, your very self. In the most extreme sense, you've actually lost your reason to live. And you can see the dangers of that. This meism actually leaves you terribly insecure. It leaves you with the crushing responsibility of justifying your existence. There was once a 100 metres runner that features in the film Chariots of Fire, which is probably the wrong generation to mention, but maybe some of you have come across it. This 100 metres runner, Harold Abrahams, and there's a great quote in this where he basically says, I've got 10 seconds to justify my existence. In other words, if I don't win this race, I've basically failed. I'm not anything that has any value. We could carry on with the list here. It's not just for young people. If your identity is not dependent on anything outside yourself, then that's going to be a problem for someone suffering from dementia. If you can't remember who you are, if you can't even remember your achievements, you really have lost your identity and your ability to create your own identity. Or something like euthanasia. Whether you should carry on living no longer depends on your fixed, unchanging human identity before God. It now depends on desires. It depends on whether you or your relatives or your doctors think that your life is worth living. You're left with anxiety. Why is this such a great characteristic of our age? Well, we're anxious about what we can't control. We like to think we can control our career, our future, our family, our relationships, our health, and even death. But the reality is we're made dependent. We don't control our birth. We don't control just about everything else in our life. And so this meism gives you an impossible task to control things that actually you're not made to control. You're not God. Rather, we'd be made to trust God. So with this sort of meism, it's all down to you. And no wonder you're anxious. And another example is the transgender ideology that says your gender is something that you can choose, something that you can create for yourself. It's something fluid. It's about how you feel about yourself. And that's far more important than the physical body you have. So if you like, if your feelings and your body are out of line, then it's your body that needs to change, not your feelings. That's a great example of how our culture wants us to sort of escape our physical bodies. And of course, there's a massive contradictions in that. If we can choose our gender, why can't we choose our height or our ethnic background or our age even? Why let our bodies limit us in those areas? But despite those contradictions and many more, there's a popularity to meism because essentially it gives power to ourselves. It really allows us to be sort of self-obsessed. It's all about me. Clue is in the name, which of course is the essence of sin. In creating your own identity, you are making a world that fits with your desires, that follows your rules, where you can be what you like. And this is a quote from the original Minecraft. I don't know if anyone still uses Minecraft, but the original Minecraft sort of promotional video. No one can tell you what you can and cannot do. With no rules to follow this adventure, it's up to you. And that's absolutely fine in Minecraft. That's the whole point. The problem is people are trying to live their real lives as if it's Minecraft. And if you're trying to do that, you are basically trying to be God. So we have these sort of two versions of identity. Let's just finish this section by comparing them. Which of these do you actually want? You have this meism where it's identity achieved. It's up to you. And it would seem to have a certain form of freedom. Except you are physically constrained. You can't actually be whatever you like. You can't choose to be a Roman emperor in the 1st century. I'm afraid you are constrained by time and space. And secondly, remember that picture of a cloud? When you think about it, clouds aren't free. They're blown by the wind. Or a liquid, it adopts the shape of the container that it goes in. In the same way, we are trapped into creating an identity that those around us approve of. We're actually just shaped by others. That's not freedom. And thirdly, we're trapped by changing desires because what you want keeps changing. And it means you can never sort of be content because if you're constantly changing your identity to fit with your latest feelings, how do you know if there's another identity you could adopt where you would be happier? You're always sort of on a journey. You're never arriving. You're always searching for a sort of better place. That leaves you with terrible insecurity. It's this thing of you can never know if there's actually something else where you could be happier. On the other hand, what about the identity that's received, given by God? That doesn't look like freedom, does it? And yet, it frees you from all this anxiety of asking, who am I? Looking in yourself, and like those Lego quotes, and trying to work out who you are. You don't have to worry about any of that. You can just focus on actually being who you are, living in line with your identity. And once you do that, God's commands are no longer sort of restrictions, they're operating instructions. To defy them is to defy reality. You know, which has more freedom? A fish that thinks, I'll go and live on the land, have a better life there, or the fish that stays in the water that it was made for? You know, which is obeying the operating instructions? Well, it's the fish in the water, and that's a bit like us with God's commands. And it ultimately frees us to be human. Sometimes people think of Christians as people that are very hung up on morality or on having the right rules. But rather, we're really just concerned about being human, being the people that we've been made to be. So I hope you get from that there's actually something deeply attractive about the identity that we have been given by God. But where does it come from? What does it rest on? Is this just sort of theology plucked out of thin air? Well, I'm going to argue it actually rests on a real person, Adam, from whom we are all descended. This is how it links to creation. So I'm going to argue you need to have a view of humanity like the left-hand diagram, as you're seeing it. Where Adam, he's the green one there, okay, who is the ancestor of every human being. If you want to try and... the second diagram is really trying to show what happens if you try and fit Adam into an evolutionary history. What happens if you try and combine Adam with evolution? And I'm going to try and show why that is not an option that works. But first, let's just see what I think the true view, how this works. Adam with no parents. He is the first human being, and from him all humanity is descended. So humanity is after Adam. Why does this matter? Well, remember what I said about human identity. What's distinctive about being human beings? We are the image of God. Well, how is it that we're the image of God? Well, it's by our physical connection to Adam. You get this in Genesis 5. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. He created them male and female. And then it talks about specifically Adam. When Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness, in his own image. So do you see what's going on here? Adam is made as the image of God, and then his likeness is then passed on to his son. It's something that goes on through physical descent. Now, I don't mean by that our sort of being the image of God is a sort of a gene or something that is passed on. It's more that we are the image of God because of this physical, biological connection with Adam. So there you go, that's what it says there. We are human, the image of God, through physical descent from Adam. But if, on the other hand, you want to try and think, well, we can adopt a sort of an evolutionary history of humanity, then you end up having to say, and you still want us to try and keep Adam, you end up having to say that Adam was one person among many. He was part of an existing population, and most basically that means he had parents. And the way this, you'll find some Christians sort of talk about this, is that you have a sort of population of maybe Homo sapiens that are descended from earlier hominin ancestors, and at some point God chooses one of those Homo sapiens to represent the human race and to be the first person to sort of bear the image of God, and gives him the name Adam. He's the first person to have this sort of relationship with God. In other words, his special status as the image of God is something added to him, because he had a life, he had an existence before he was the image of God. There's something arbitrary about this, because why pick Adam as opposed to, this person here or this person? There's nothing sort of special about him. And it means that not all human beings today were necessarily going to be descended from Adam. If you've got this whole population, you could be descended from this one or one of these. You're not necessarily going to be descended from Adam. And it means that Adam is existing alongside other people who are essentially physically, intellectually, emotionally identical to him. There's nothing that distinguishes Adam from them except this special status he is given. If that's the view you take, you're going to have a problem with your human identity. Okay, the first problem is, who are the image of God? You see, Adam's fine because God directly gives him that status. But what about Eve, for example? Was she made the image of God at the same time? If not, Adam has married a creature who, spiritually speaking, is an animal, which is sort of slightly weird because you've just redefined marriage in the very first marriage, which is incredibly weird. And what about Adam's parents? Do they become the image of God at the same time? They are physically, emotionally, intellectually just like Adam. And yet, spiritually speaking, they're animals. So could Adam eat them? What about Adam's contemporaries? Do they all get zapped at the same time? How does this work? How do we know who is the image of God today? This actually becomes a very pressing issue. And if you say, well, it's people that descended from Adam, well, what about people that weren't descended from Adam that are existing today? What was the humanity that Jesus was born into? Was it the same? Was it Adam's humanity? Was it our humanity? What was it? And the big problem is who does Adam actually represent? Which people today is Adam actually the representative of? Who is in Adam? So there's big problems in actually being clear over who is the image of God, who has this special identity that God has given to us. Second problem is the image of God becomes something purely spiritual. Remember, in this scenario where Adam is one among many, his image of godness is something added to him. In other words, he existed before he was the image of God. It's not intrinsic to his identity. It's not rooted in how he was made. So he has a body, he walks upright, he thinks, he sings, he plans, he designs tools, he makes up stories, he laughs, he does all of those things, because those are the things that Homo sapiens can do. He does all of that before he is the image of God. So it's something added, it's not intrinsic to its identity. It also devalues our bodies. It's really important to understand our human identity is body and soul together. And you might say, well, hang on a minute, how this idea that in our bodies too we image God, how can we image God when God doesn't have a body? Well, I think we can understand it in this way, that God is often described as doing things and having capabilities that we accomplish with bodies, but God manages it without needing a body. So, for example, Psalm 94 verse 9, does he who implanted the ear not hear? Does he who formed the eye not see? You see, yes, he's given us bodies to do these things, but God is able to do those things, and we image God and those capabilities God has in our bodies. So it is both in body and soul that we have our human identity and we are the image of God. So our bodies matter. And this has particular relevance to that gender debate. If you go back to Genesis 1:27, look at what it's saying here. God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Notice how those are sort of parallel statements. So the image of God is something that is seen in both male and female. It's about that is how God has made them as physical people. Well, here's the thing. If the image of God is something purely spiritual, then that presumably also applies to the maleness and femaleness, given the sort of parallelism in this verse. It means it has no relation to our physical body. It's sort of something we just dream up in ourselves, which of course is the very thing that transgender ideology says. It says that gender is a construct that is not constrained by our bodies. And in taking this wrong view of Adam, you've actually made the Bible basically say that. I think that is a bit of a problem. we don't want to say the image of God is something purely spiritual, and that's what we're going to have to do if you try and fit Adam into the evolutionary scheme. Now then, there's a third thing which I'm just going to skip over for now. You have a problem with sin, because basically God makes... If you think of evolutionary history, you have people doing this sort of thing all the way through it. There is lots of violence, basically. So those human-like people that God picks one of them to be Adam, they're all people that, for example, are violent. They're all promiscuous or whatever. They're doing all that from the beginning because that's just what they've always done. In other words, they've been made sinful. And that, I think, creates quite a problem. But I'm just going to skip over for that now. So let's just summarise where we've got to. If you have this wrong view of Adam, if Adam is just one among many, if you take the evolutionary understanding of our human ancestry, you have this problem. Adam's relationship with the rest of humanity is no longer easily defined. It's not based on anything objective like physical descent. As we've just seen, that his human identity as the image of God is not connected to anything physical. Having a body is not essential to his true humanity. That is a problem. And of course, his relationship with God is also wrecked here, because it would have seemed he managed quite well as a creature made by God before, without any sort of personal relationship. He was this sort of violent person, but then God gives him this special status, and suddenly this is now a problem in his relationship with God. So what we have is in this view of Adam, his image of godness isn't intrinsic to his identity. And so you have a very curious contradiction, that God is saying you are special, but you haven't been made special. And I think that undermines this whole understanding of human identity. So don't worry if you haven't grasped all of that. I've covered a lot very quickly. My point is that to have this true biblical view of human identity, this attractive vision of human identity, you need the biblical Adam, who is the first man and who is the ancestor of all of us. You can't combine that with an evolutionary understanding of humanity. You're going to have to come up with a different understanding. How does all this relate to the gospel? Let's just finish with this. The gospel is good news because it's the answer to a problem. And the problem is basically that Adam has gone wrong. His sin meant he no longer reflected God as he should. He's still the image of God, and yet it's a defaced image. It's like a portrait where someone has sort of sprayed some paint over it or something. It's still a portrait. It's still there, but it's been spoilt. And so Adam still has incredible capabilities, but he uses those capabilities in sinful ways. And Adam, as the first human being, as our representative, he corrupts the rest of all the people that descend from him. Our lives are intertwined with him. Remember, humanity is this unity. So we're told in Corinthians, for in Adam all die, so in Christ all will be made alive. This is telling us my problem is more than just I make bad choices, that I'm a rule breaker. I am a rule breaker, but my problem's deeper than that. If that was my only problem, in a sense, the answer would be, well, make better choices, keep the rules. But that isn't the gospel. My problem is that I am in Adam. My very identity is sinful. I sin because by nature I am sinful. My family is sinful. And we're all evidence of this. I was very intrigued when one of my children, almost as soon as they could learn to talk, used that astonishing linguistic ability to explain to me that it was their teddy who had made the pen marks on their wall. I thought that was incredible. You have these incredible capabilities. You have a moral consciousness. They were aware that they'd done something wrong. They had a pretty good imagination. They could think of a teddy, imagining that drawing on the wall. Some pretty quick thinkingness coming up with that excuse. And it was all with a view of trying to avoid responsibility. See, incredible capabilities, but used in a sinful way. And their problem was they were descended from me. And I was descended from Adam. So we have this big problem with our family, with our identity. My problem is that I am part of this single human tree. I have this real physical connection with Adam. His sin means I have this sinful identity. God's image in me is defaced. So what's the answer? Well, the answer is Jesus, one who shares our humanity. He comes in Adam's family line. But unlike everyone else in Adam's line, he is sinless. And in Jesus, we see what we're meant to be as human beings. Not only do we see who God is when we look at Jesus, we actually see what we are meant to be as human beings. He is the image of God. So basically, I need Jesus' identity. And that is what the gospel is all about. I need a new identity, Jesus' identity. How does that happen? How can I gain that new identity? Well, how do we get our identity in the first place? It's through being born, isn't it? And what are we told in John? To those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, born of God. How does that happen? Well, we're born again, to use the language in John 3. And it happens through what Jesus did at the cross. I think there's a real symbolism in the cross. Do you recognise the diagram there? Jesus is hung up, he's connecting earth and heaven. His arms are outstretched to humanity. He is the image of God we fail to be. And my sinful identity is crucified with Christ. And in Christ, I become a new person. So in becoming a Christian, it's not about sort of escaping the world to a spiritual existence. It's actually becoming the human being that I'm meant to be. Someone put it like this: our lives are very, in a very crucial sense, our own, but we truly become ourselves only by being in Christ. It is only in Christ that any man or woman can become his or her truest self. Or if you want it from the New Testament, in Colossians, you have taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge, in the image of its creator. There is no Greek or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. Notice all the identity language there. Language, nationality, religion, work. And he's saying that that is all subsumed in our identity in Christ. So this is basically where you get to in the gospel. Your identity is restored in your union with Christ. We are people in a right relationship with God. We are people whose future hope is to have new resurrection bodies in a new physical creation. Okay, we're not getting rid of our physicality, it's just being upgraded. So we're still going to be physical people. And it's like a new family we're part of, and it's the family of the church. And that, I think, is a gospel to celebrate. So that's where I'm going to finish. And let me just alert you to this. If you've got questions on different aspects of creation and things, there is a podcast. I work with a guy called Paul Garner, and he's one of the people on this podcast, Let's Talk Creation. There's some cards for it on the table outside, and there's loads of back episodes. And if there's a sort of topic or question you want to explore, you'll probably find it's been done or begun to be done in one of the episodes there. So it's a great resource to explore some of these creation issues. And if any of you are sort of sort of end of sixth form sort of stage, or know other people in that stage, or people going to be in university, there is a summer school we're going to be running this summer in London, and there's some information about that as well.